Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our fifth and final program for Yom HaShoah, a Holocaust commemoration program run by the Jewish Federation of San Diego County. My name is Darren Schwartz. I am the Chief Program and Strategy Officer. As those of you who have joined us before, you understand that this is the third of 3 days where we're commemorating the Holocaust and those that perished and those that survived. Our Yom HaShoah presentation follows the arc of remember, honor, and teach. And today is really about teaching and education. Earlier today, we had the Butterfly Project and their educators, who many happen to be the children of Holocaust survivors, talk about the work that they're doing in classrooms, many elementary and middle school classrooms. And today we will be joined by Talia Schauter. Before we begin, a couple of things. For those of you that have been on Zoom and those that haven't, we do not have a chat function. We encourage all questions to be in the Q&A. We are not going to be recognizing hand raising, so please put questions into the Q&A and we will get them at the end of Talia's presentation. I understand that there's a lot of schools joining us today, which is absolutely phenomenal. Thank you and welcome. Before we get started, I wanted to share a little bit about Holocaust survivors as it relates to San Diego. First, I want to make sure everybody knows that we have a club here in San Diego called the New Life Club, which is comprised of local Holocaust survivors. They get together on a regular basis. They've been a support group for each other for many decades. Over my shoulder over here, Vera Laurel is their current president. We also have a club of second generation survivors or children of survivors called San Diego Generations of the Shoah. And they get together, many of them have grown up, but they have really committed themselves in their group to honoring the legacy of their parents. Here in San Diego, well, let me start first with, in the United States, there's about 80,000 Holocaust survivors or victims of Nazi terror scattered throughout the entire country. And in San Diego, we believe that there are about 500. Some of them are active participants in our community, speaking at schools, joining other groups like Silver Sneakers, speaking, playing mahjong. They're on committees here at Federation and in other organizations. And others are less fortunate. About 1/3 of Holocaust survivors are struggling to meet basic needs. And here at the Federation, we've launched the San Diego Holocaust Survivor Coalition to mobilize San Diego to care for survivors, as well as to make sure to honor and preserve their legacies. And to that end, I'd like to introduce Talia Schauter.
Talia, hi, thank you.
Talia is a big part of this. Talia is the granddaughter of a survivor who she'll talk about in a moment, and has really dedicated the last several years to telling her father's story and teaching tolerance. She is an award winner. I know she's the recipient of the Peter Tortek Leadership Award. She is a graduating senior from Poway High School and going off to Chapman College. And we're just so proud of her, and we're really grateful, Talia, that you could join us today. And take it away.
All right, thank you. Okay, hi, my name is Talia Schauter, and I'm 18 years old. I'm a senior at Poway High School, and I will be attending Chapman University next year. I'm an ambassador for my school. I love to take pictures and spend time with my friends and family. I'm a proud Jewish teenager, and I'm honored to take part in this year's virtual Yom HaShoah event. Over the past 2 years, I've gone largely to middle and high school to share my grandfather's Holocaust survival story. And to date, I have reached about 9,000 people. I've spoken within San Diego County and even internationally. I tailor each presentation to my audience. including programs that schools are using, such as the No Place for Hate program, and explain current events displaying anti-Semitism. I'm going to present to you what I would normally present to my middle and high school audiences. I understand the social pressures that you experience. Today, I just ask that you put yourself in someone else's shoes. Most people have heard a joke about the Holocaust or other sensitive topics. I've had this experience at my school, hearing my peers joke about the horrors of the Holocaust. Believe me when I say it is not funny. It is not funny to have a joke made against your culture and have to walk away crying or pretend like it doesn't hurt. Enough is enough. Let's make change together. About a year ago, April 27, 2019, in my home of Poway, the Chabad synagogue faced a shooting. It was a Saturday morning Shabbat service, as well as being the last day of Passover. Members of the synagogue were simply exhibiting their rights as a citizen of the United States of freedom of religion when they were faced with a killer, 19 years of age, who interrupted their time of prayer and opened fire. The rabbi tried to calm the shooter down, and he himself was shot in the hand. There were 3 other victims. Monday, January 27th, the 75th International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which marks 75 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, swastikas and profane language were found on the inside of a New York apartment building. The owner of this apartment being a woman who lost family members to the Holocaust. It is important to become educated so that we can overcome history and make sure that hate-motivated crimes are not repeated. I want to work with you to ensure the safety and acceptance of our peers, no matter one's race, religion, sexual orientation, or differences as a whole. You may have heard the motto related to Holocaust remembrance, never forget. Aside from just knowing this motto, what action are we taking to ensure that society as a whole never forgets? I believe that in order to make a positive change for the future, we have to speak out for what is right. This brings me to my next point. Soon there aren't going to be any Holocaust survivors left. Who is going to be able to speak out for them and their memory? Think about this. There are an estimated 100,000 Holocaust survivors of camps, ghettos, and hiding under Nazi occupation left worldwide today, but they are mostly in their 80s and 90s. Our generation must continue educating and spreading awareness. A survey was completed in 2018, and it was found that an estimated 11% of US adults and 22% of millennials said they either hadn't heard of or were not sure whether they had heard of the Holocaust. And 31% of adults and 41% of millennials believe incorrectly that 2 million Jews or fewer were killed during the Holocaust. To think that people are living their lives having no idea of what happened from 1938 to 1945 to the 6 million Jews and 5 million other minorities. Today, I want to share with you a very personal story. My grandfather, Paul Shatter, was one of the incredible survivors of the Holocaust. I have listened firsthand to his traumatic experiences living in Nazi Germany and living through the Holocaust. Today, I would like to join you to create a safer, more accepting community. The Holocaust took place from 1938 to 1945. The Holocaust was the mass killing of Jews and other minorities in Europe, such as Slavs, Russians, Spaniards, Polish people, Roma, Jehovah's Witnesses, Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, people who identified as part of the LGBTQ community, as well as those who were physically or mentally disabled and others who didn't fit the Nazi ideal. There were over 6 million Jewish victims who were slaughtered throughout the Holocaust, and up to 5 million victims who were part of the other groups that I listed. Let's back up to before the war had started in Germany. My grandpa Paul was the youngest of 3 sons. His dad's name was Marcus and his mom was Fanny. His older brothers were named Jacob and Herman. Paul's family was very involved in Jewish life, and they were active participants in their local synagogue, RASHI synagogue. Paul began attending school at the age of 6, and he attended a Jewish private school as Jews were not permitted to attend public school. Before the war began, Jews were already being segregated from the others. They had fewer rights in comparison to the other Germans, even though they were equally capable and contributed greatly to the country. Many Jews were business owners. My grandfather's family owned a department store named Kaufhaus Schauder, where they sold furniture and other expensive goods. November 10, 1938, was a date that changed everything for the Jews in Germany and throughout Europe. This date will never be forgotten by any Jew that survived the Holocaust. This was when Kristallnacht occurred. Kristallnacht, meaning crystal night and known as Night of Broken Glass, refers to the smashing and destruction of Jewish homes, businesses, synagogues, and cemeteries by Nazi soldiers and supporters of Hitler. Kristallnacht was the turning point for anti-Semitism to rapidly worsen across Europe. Anti-Semitism is the hatred of Jews just for the fact that they are Jewish. Hitler and his Nazi officials were masters at brainwashing the youth of Germany into believing the Nazi ideals, which were driven by hate. For my grandpa Paul's family specifically, their department store was destroyed during Kristallnacht, leaving them no choice but to flee or face being arrested. The night that Kristallnacht occurred, Paul's father Marcus was arrested by the Gestapo, the Nazi police. My grandpa remembered this day vividly. He was the youngest and least suspicious of his family, so his mother sent him with bread to bring to his father in the jail cell. He was mocked and laughed at by the Gestapo when he asked to see his father. Finally, after much humiliation, Paul was allowed to see him. Paul spent his time in the jail cell crying and being comforted by his dad. Paul was unaware that this was going to be the last time he would ever see his father. The image of his helpless father, sitting alone, on a stool, in a stark prison cell, would be forever ingrained in Paul's memory. Through this experience, Paul was forced to become a man at just 7 years old. Later, Paul and his family would learn of his father, Marcus's death in the concentration camp of Buchenwald. A concentration camp is where Jews, along with the other minority groups, were sent to die. Most of the people would meet their death there. They were starved and worked to death, sent on death marches, tortured, experimented on, and killed in gas chambers. The living quarters, as you can see, were insane. Many people shared one wooden frame of a bed, and they were sparsely clothed. Every person in the concentration camp was assigned a number that was tattooed onto their arm. This is how each person was known, more like an animal than an actual human. Upon entering the concentration camps, the Nazis took the belongings of each person, shaved their heads, among other things. Each set of belongings, such as these rings, shoes, and suitcases, representing a person's life unlived. Outside of the camps, throughout towns in Europe, all Jews were required to wear a yellow Jewish star at all times. They had to sew it into their clothes, and if caught without it, they could be arrested or sent to a concentration camp. For the next 3 months, my grandfather Paul remained in the city of Worms, Germany, with his mother and 2 brothers. His mother arranged to rent a small apartment next to a cemetery. After 3 months, his family received notice that they would have to leave the city because as Jews, they did not have the proper permits to live in Worms. After leaving Worms, my grandpa's mother, Fanny, arranged for he and his brothers to stay in a Jewish orphanage in Frankfurt, while she was forced to go to Berlin to work in a clinic. Inside the orphanage, the boys were able to practice Judaism and celebrate the important holidays along with weekly Shabbat. Even though inside the orphanage, the children were able to practice Judaism, they were still well aware of the danger lurking outside. They remained in this orphanage for about 3 years until their mother arranged for them to be moved to a different Jewish orphanage in Berlin. Their mother was able to visit a few times, and every time she made sure to remind her sons that if they were ever faced with a threat, they had to run. This picture was taken during one of her visits and is the last picture ever taken with all 3 sons alive. Late in August of 1943, danger arrived. The Gestapo, Nazi police, had completely surrounded the orphanage, ready to transport all the children to different concentration camps where most would meet their death. Paul and his brothers came together to decide their plan. Both Paul and his eldest brother Jacob knew they had no choice except to run. However, Herman, a rule follower, insisted on following German law, forcing Paul and Jacob to leave him behind. Herman would later die in the concentration camp of Auschwitz. This chilling photo is of a Nazi document sealing young Herman's fate. Paul and Jacob were able to escape the orphanage through the back staircase, and through all the chaos, they went unnoticed. They ran through the dark for 30 minutes to find their mother at the clinic. Somehow they were able to find the building, even though they had never been there before. That night marked the beginning of Paul's underground life and was the beginning of an even greater set of challenges and evils. Many Jews took to a very dangerous underground life throughout Europe. The Nazis were moving throughout the continent towards their goal of killing all the Jews and taking over the world. Throughout the rest of the war, Paul, Jacob, and Fanny lived their underground life. They illegally removed their yellow Jewish stars that they'd been required to wear and pretended to be non-Jewish Germans who had been displaced due to the frequent bombing. The family did not stay together throughout the rest of the war, but hid in various locations, such as train stations like this one. One event that left an impact on my grandpa was during his hiding in an apartment in Berlin with other Jews. He was the only member of his family in the building at the time, and the Gestapo had arrived to round everyone up. Thinking fast, Paul went into the bathroom and noticed a metal tub high on a ledge. He quickly climbed up to the tub and hid underneath it. Paul remained hidden until he was sure that the building was vacant. He then proceeded to climb down and found the door sealed, as the Gestapo did after leaving a building empty. If it had not been for his quick thinking, Paul would have been arrested along with the other Jews. For the rest of the war, my grandpa stayed with the Lobel family. First, they hid in an apartment in Karlsruhe owned by a non-Jewish family. With time, the Lobels became suspicious of that family's actions, and they were fearful that they'd be turned over to the Gestapo. So they moved into another apartment owned by Otto Herner and his family. My grandpa Paul described Otto as a non-Jewish angel. Otto Herner owned an acre of land with a small barn located on the property. Due to the land's remote location, Paul and the Lobel family next moved to this barn where they would remain hidden until they were liberated by the American soldiers. Paul's brother Jacob and mother were hiding separately in another town. When his mother learned that Paul had moved, she arranged for Jacob to join him. The conditions were terrible. Paul, Jacob, and the other Jews lived with freezing temperatures in an uninsulated barn that they shared with a variety of rodents. By this time, my grandfather was 13. Since he was the smallest and least suspicious, he had to fetch the food, a dangerous task. This picture was taken after the war in Germany and is of the barn that Paul, along with the other Jews, lived in. After 7 long years living with the fear and unknown of whether there would be a tomorrow, my grandpa Paul and his family were liberated and reunited. His mother was hiding in a US occupied zone and was liberated first. She then went with a rabbi and 2 other Jewish soldiers on a jeep in search of her sons. In time, Fanny and her search party finally came across Paul and Jacob in the barn in Edlingen. The 3 remaining members of the family were reunited at last, yet so much of who they were had been destroyed. This is Rabbi Hazelkorn, the US chaplain who took the 2 other soldiers to find Paul and Jacob. This is a picture taken after the family was together and now free. Even though they were technically free, my grandfather's family, along with the other surviving Jews, were left in a country that was uncomfortable and not home. In this picture, you can also see a dog. My grandpa was given this dog, whom he named Seppel, in order to give him something to care for and learn how to love again. He was given this dog by Captain Albert Hutler, a Jewish American Army captain who would play a huge role in getting the family back on their feet. Together, the rabbi and Captain Hutler rented a small apartment for Paul's family, where they began their new, free life. Captain Hutler became a father figure to Paul. Paul, now age 14, was once again living with the remainder of his family, only his mother and brother. Captain Hutler found my grandpa Paul a job working for the American Red Cross in Germany. For his job, Paul filled 30-gallon barrels with scalding hot coffee that he brewed. Looking back, he realized that this task was actually very dangerous. The next step for my grandpa and his family was to leave Germany and begin their new American life. Captain Hutler helped with arranging the proper paperwork and money that would be required for Paul and his family to make it to the United States. By September 1946, everything had been arranged for the family's journey. That month, a military ship, the Marine Marlin, left Germany with Paul and his family aboard. It was a 10-day journey and Paul was seasick the entire time. Hammocks served as beds for those aboard the ship. In time, the ship passed the Statue of Liberty, which for Paul represented freedom and pride. He and his family came through the port of Ellis Island. After 8 years of no schooling in Germany, Paul was able to begin his education in his temporary home of Chicago. Schooling was not easy as he did not speak English and found himself very far behind academically. Later, Paul moved to San Diego with Captain Hutler and his family. A year later, Paul's mother and brother also moved to San Diego, and the Schauder family was reunited. My grandpa attended and graduated from San Diego High School in 1956. He continued his education at San Diego State University, where he earned a degree in accounting in 1960. During Paul's college years, he worked in a Jewish bakery at night in downtown San Diego to earn money for his family. Paul then worked with his mother Fanny to start an egg ranch, and together they sold eggs. Paul would later work this ranch with his wife and children for many years. Even later, Paul opened a liquor store with his family. Paul proposed to Joan, who was his wife of 56 years, in the home of Max and Rose Schindler, who were also Holocaust survivors of Auschwitz. In 1962, Paul and Joan were married in San Diego. One of the rabbis who married them was Rabbi Hazelhorn, the very man who helped to reunite Paul and Jacob with their mother Fanny years before in Germany. Paul's best man was Captain Albert Hutler, who continued to be an important figure in Paul's life. Paul and Joan had 3 children together: Margot, Mark, my father, named for Paul's father, Marcus, and Yael, and they became proud grandparents as well. Sadly, my grandfather passed away about a year ago on January 19th, 2019, at the age of 87 after a brave battle with cancer. To sum up, this strong, humble man that I've shared about today was my grandpa, and his story has helped to shape the person that I am today. If there's anything I hope I accomplished, it would be for each and every one of you to be more aware and embrace each other's differences. Don't just sit in the back and let someone tell you something you don't believe is right. Stick up for each other and the right thing. I want to share a well-known quote by Martin Niemöller, a pastor who spoke out against the Nazis during the Holocaust. I find this to be very powerful and still relevant today. It reads, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." I encourage each and every one of you to talk to your own families. You never know what challenges your families may have faced. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Talia. I've been hearing about your presentation now for a long time, and I finally got to see it, and it's everything that I heard it would be. Thank you very much. For our callers, I want to remind everybody that there is a function called Q&A where you can post questions that I will ask to Talia. We encourage you to use that. Talia, I remember when your grandfather passed away, and I know that he was very much aware of this Talia's tolerance to her. Can you share a little bit about what his thoughts were about you doing this and, carrying his legacy?
Yeah, so my grandpa, he never really shared his story. And he opened up to me when I was in 10th grade and working on a world history project. And I created that project into a presentation. And he got to see me speak a couple of times. And he was always just very proud of me. And he was a man of few words, but like when he spoke, everyone listened. And it just meant a lot to me to know how much my project meant to him.
Talia, will you talk a little bit about how this project started and what you were thinking at the beginning?
So I was doing a project for my world history class. We were learning about World War II and the Holocaust, and we had to choose a figure to do the project on. And so I asked my teacher if I could do it on my grandpa because I knew he was a Holocaust survivor, but I didn't know much of his story. And so I created a scrapbook out of his story, and I was then asked later in the school year to adapt it to a presentation for one of the local middle schools that was having problems with kids playing an anti-Semitic game. And so I adapted it to a presentation my sophomore year, and I fell in love with presenting, and it's kind of just gone from there.
Wonderful. We have a question here from Lisa McGuigan, she says, "We are also proud of you. How will you continue your work now that you're leaving San Diego, going to Chapman, not too far away? And do you have siblings that might want to continue, or cousins, your message?"
So I am attending Chapman next year, and I plan on double minoring in leadership and Holocaust history. So I'll be able to continue to learn more about the Holocaust and incorporate my grandpa's project within that. And I hope I will still be able to present on the side and like during my school breaks when I come home to San Diego. And I'll hopefully have new opportunities up in Orange County.
Wonderful. We have a question from Tej Gulati. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. How old was your grandpa when the Holocaust started?
He was about 7 years old.
And remind us again, where was he in birth order with his siblings?
He was the youngest of 3 sons.
Ziva asks, you said your grandpa didn't tell you his story until you were in the 10th grade. What did you know about his story when you were younger, and how old were you when you first learned about the Holocaust?
So I knew he was a Holocaust survivor, but I didn't have much of a grasp of his story. I first had a touch of it my 7th grade when I did a project and was able to interview him a little bit, but it was mostly like surface level. And I really learned his story my sophomore year when he opened up and he was sharing stories with me that even my grandma didn't know. So for him, it was just a way for him to get his entire story out, and I was able to get it all on paper, and now I'm able to share it.
That's wonderful. Now, you've given many presentations at schools. Is there any particular moments of interaction with your presentation that really stick with you?
A lot of schools, like the students will write cards to me. And one of my favorite things is sitting through and reading each and every one of them. And I love getting to read certain lines when they're saying, I went home to my family and I learned that we came from Vietnam, or things like that. And they're learning about their histories that they didn't know. And my presentation inspired them to do that. And that's really special to me.
You know, I would imagine you do a lot of talking about the relevance of the Holocaust today. We don't have, I mean, there are some genocides going on, but what have you found have been some other kind of crossover topics, maybe about being an upstander, that's, you know, important lessons to learn from the Holocaust?
I think what everyone needs to learn is the fact that, yes, this happened in the past, but it doesn't mean we can just push it aside. Anti-Semitic acts are continuing to be done, like I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, current events, to bring the relevance to today, and that the more we are educated, the more we can be tolerant of our differences.
Lauren Finch asks, my family and I are so proud of you and all of your accomplishments. How has knowing your grandfather's story changed you?
I think it's given me a new perspective on just the way I can change someone else's life, and being able to be an educator even at such a young age. I want to be a teacher, so I've wanted to since I was in preschool, so this has kind of given me a little taste of that, and I'm excited to continue educating.
Wonderful. We have a question actually from Cheryl Ratner Price, who runs the Butterfly Project, who I mentioned was on earlier. And your approach seems to welcome questions. Do you get good questions during your presentations in school, or do you find that students are often quiet?
It really depends on the audience. A lot of times I'll get good questions, and every question is a good question as long as they can learn from it. And a lot of times, yes, it is quiet at first, but I turn it around to them and I ask them a question first, asking them how they can use my grandpa's story to prevent something like this from happening again. So I'm calling on them first if they're not coming with questions to me, and it kind of gets the ball rolling. Yeah.
You know, I've got an interesting question here from Navia. She wants to know how do you define modern activism?
Ooh.
I know it's a tough question. We're hard hitting here.
I think just any way someone can stand up and be teaching others, it doesn't have to be big, is a way to affecting one life can make a difference. It doesn't have to be an entire room full of people, just putting the impact even to one person.
Yeah. You know, I would imagine every time you talk about your father's story or your grandfather's story, you have your father as a resource. And I'm wondering, and one of our anonymous questioners wanted to know, what would you, if your grandfather was around today, are there any new questions that you might ask him to better understand his experience?
Wow. I feel like we really delved into almost all of the possibilities. Just a common question that I haven't really been able to answer is where I got all the pictures from and all of the documents. That's been a common question that I was like, well, my grandpa could probably tell me that. But otherwise, I feel like we really covered it all. And I think it was good closure for him to be able to share it with me.
I've got a comment here from an old friend, Alex Schiller, who's saying, Talia, it's a small world. Albert Hutler went to my temple, Beth Israel, and he wrote a book called Agony of Survival, and he signed a copy in 1990. Your great-grandfather would be so proud of you. To think the Jewish soldier who helped your grandfather was my temple friend. That's really very nice.
Yeah.
Do you know if your grandfather or father, or if you have experienced anti-Semitism directly?
I definitely have. And I'm thankful for the fact that I am so educated and I am supposed to put, or I am able to push back, but not only push back, but with education and information to back up what I'm saying. And I've experienced it at my school, people making passing jokes. And to me, they're definitely not funny. And I'm definitely able to tell them, hey, this isn't cool because, and I'm able to explain it to them. And it really changes their perspective. Once there was an incident at my school, and I actually went and discussed it with my principal, and he was ready to get the kid in trouble. And that was not my goal at all. It was more to bring to the attention the fact that these are happening, these anti-Semitic comments are happening, and that I'm a resource that can help educate. And my principal, Mr. Nash, and my superintendent, Dr. Phelps, have all been super supportive of my presentations and helping me to get to new places to speak.
It's wonderful. It's great to have that kind of support. Maya Henkin says, how do you think Holocaust education will continue to change as more firsthand survivors pass away and the duty of telling these stories lies in the hands of the third generation? P.S. So proud of you.
I think hearing the story from a Holocaust survivor is super impactful. But when you're able to hear it from a third generation, especially in my case, I'm mostly speaking to teenagers, they're able to relate to me a little more because I'm their peer. I'm 5 feet tall, I look like them. Even these middle schoolers, they think I'm one of them. I've been asked, wait, you're the speaker? Like, I thought you were in middle school. And so they're just able to relate to me so much more that I think they're more open to hearing. So in the future, they'll be able to learn still, as long as we continue.
It's wonderful. Barbara Ostroff, who is the chair of our Yom HaShoah committee, wants you to talk a little bit more about the fact that you are graduating, you're going off to Chapman. How do you envision bringing this to a college campus? Talk a little bit more about how you hope to kind of keep Talia's Tolerance Tour alive.
Yeah, so I actually recently got in contact with the Chabad rabbi at Chapman, and they were already super supportive of what I'm doing. And I know I'll have resources within the Holocaust Minor and Hillel and Chabad to be able to continue to be spreading this. And I'm an integrated educational studies major, so I feel like that'll also bring resources with the schools, like the local schools.
Wonderful. Give me a moment. I'm going to look through some of these questions here. This is an interesting question. Did your grandfather keep a journal?
No, he did not.
Let's see what else we've got here. Where was your grandma during the Holocaust?
She was in Argentina, and then she came. What? She was born in 1941, so she didn't live through much of the Holocaust, but then she came to the United States from Argentina.
Wonderful. I'm glad you have a fact-checking team on site. How do you think the Holocaust relates to hate that still occurs today? This is from Emily Nguyen.
The Holocaust was an example of people who were being bystanders and not speaking out. And with any form of hate, if no one's speaking out against that hate and are just going along with it, with the bystander effect, and then it's just going to continue escalating. And there are different examples of scapegoating, like the Jews were scapegoated during the Holocaust. And if people aren't speaking out and standing up to that hate or that leader that's causing the effect, then there's no way to stop it. So we have to continue educating to learn from that.
Talia, have you had any opportunities to work with other third generation or fourth generation of survivors and help them craft their own story? I mean, the visual aids that you have are tremendous. Your presentation is very polished and easy to understand and relatable. Have you had that opportunity?
I have not actually.
And is that something you're open to doing?
Definitely.
Let's see here. This is from Sherry Wexler, and I think that some of this you answered, but you can go over it again. Very moving presentation. Did your grandfather talk with his own children much about the Holocaust and his experience? Did he have friends that he spoke with? The question is more about, like, do you have knowledge of how he was able to cope with the difficult emotions and trauma that he suffered during the Holocaust?
Honestly, he didn't speak about it much at all. It wasn't like a pity party in a sense. He was very quiet about his experiences, and I don't think his kids really knew much from his story. His brother, who was also a Holocaust survivor who lived in San Diego, did he share? He didn't share much either.
So you had mentioned specifically somebody had given him a dog, a support animal. Was this just, was there more to that story? Did he often talk about this dog and about how that might have been a coping mechanism that helped him?
So whenever he talked about Seppel, his dog, he lit up. He wasn't able to bring Seppel to the United States, but he got a new dog in the United States and also named the dog Seppel. So I think it was like a special little support for him, especially as a teenager.
There's a question of from Santiago Vargas. What happened to the rest of the kids in the orphanage? Do you have any knowledge of that?
I'm not sure, but my grandpa's brother, who did end up staying, did end up dying in a concentration camp. So it's likely that a lot of them did as well.
One interesting comment and another question that I think is important. The question is, have you ever considered being a high school teacher?
No, I want to be an elementary school teacher. A lot of my past teachers have said, no, you're a middle school teacher. No, you would totally teach high school. But for me, I could not choose one subject to teach. And I just love working with kids, especially the elementary school aged ones. As an ambassador for my school this past year, I was able to go to the elementary schools and do character counts presentations and play with them on the playground every month. And that is just where I love it.
Oh, wonderful. Barbara Birnbaum asks or says, way to go, exquisitely modeling an approach for teachers to employ that will live on beyond the survivors and create up standards in their students. How do you think we can motivate more students to do these kinds of projects, even if the survivors aren't their relatives?
Education is the key to being able to teach others and becoming knowledgeable as an individual and learning other people's stories and just using those as models to create a more widespread acceptance.
I would imagine you didn't start with this presentation that you provided today. It's taken many different iterations. I think a part of what's kind of gotten you to where you're at is your persistence and dedication and perhaps others, can follow in your footsteps, but know that it's not simple, right?
Right. It's a lot of emailing administrators and working with my already busy schedule to schedule the presentations at each school. And I'm thankful that my administrators have allowed me to be missing school to go present and are supportive of my project.
Yeah. So Talia, at the beginning, I mentioned the New Life Club, which is the club of Holocaust survivors. And you mentioned that your grandparents got engaged in the living room of Rose and Max Schindler. And then we
It was
have
actually the bathroom.
Oh, in the bathroom. Wow. And then we have the San Diego generations of the Shoah. Do you know of any groups of your peers or of third generations that are coming together?
I do not.
That would be interesting to find out more. I've got a question here from Ellen Winter. Do you think your desire to work with younger kids comes from your experience to protect and teach future generations because of your grandfather, because your grandfather was so young?
That's really
Does it
interesting.
derive from that?
I don't know. I've just always had a love for kids. I think I had a love for kids even before I really deeply understood my grandpa's story. And just like the 4th and 5th grade age is perfect for me.
Wonderful. I'm going to see if I can find one more great question. Um,
And in the meantime, if there are any other questions that aren't answered through this, you can DM me them on Talia's Tolerance Tour on Instagram. And follow me.
I'm looking for a great question for you, Talia. Give me one more moment. Let's see here. Sorry for the awkward pause. This question is from Beverly Kavanaugh. Have you seen a change in the children at the school where anti-Semitic games were being played, or there might have been some problems? Have you seen any kind of direct change in individuals as a result of your presentation?
So personally, since I am a guest speaker at these schools, I'm not able to go and like observe the actions of the students. But in letters that I've received, they're saying that they are never going to accept the hate that was happening, and they're going to be more aware and embracing each other's differences and actually sticking up for the people who are being targeted and speaking out against the hateful words that may be said.
Talia, thank you so much for the presentation. I am going to go off book here for a second and ask you to bring your slides back up for a second. And Talia, is the best way to get you with your Instagram? How else can people get a hold of you? I know that there's not only educators and students, but there are others that I'm sure would like to have you give a presentation. Instagram, how else would you like people to get a hold of you?
Email, it's taliashouter@yahoo.com.
And can you spell Shouter?
SCHAUDER.
Wonderful. And again, I'd like to remind everybody that this has been recorded. It will be up on our website at jewishinsandiego.org/Yom HaShoah. It'll also be on our Jewish in San Diego page on Facebook. So this entire presentation and how to get a hold of Talia will be there. We want to thank everybody for joining us today, and those of you that have joined us throughout the past 3 days. Please know that this jewishinsandiego.org/Yom HaShoah will be up throughout the year. Tons of great resources, content, ways to learn more, and we encourage you to join. Thank you again, Talia. Thank you for all of our presenters over the course of the last 3 days. And there are a few more events happening throughout the week nationally. So again, please check out the website. Thank you.
Thank you.